Hi everyone, in this video we are going to discuss a new type of electrochemical cell, and this one is called an electrolytic cell. So let's get a definition out first. So an electrolytic cell is a, let's say, a type of electrochemical cell that converts chemical energy to electrical energy. So it sounds very, very similar. So now here is the thing that's going to be different or new or unique to an electrolytic cell. This is considered a non-spontaneous process. Okay, a non-spontaneous process. So this is a process that does not occur on its own in isolation. It needs or it requires an external source of energy. Usually it's a battery. Okay, but somehow we have to provide this chemical reaction some energy in order for it to go through its transition, because usually an electrolytic cell is what you've set up an electrochemical cell, but you put your wires on backwards. Okay, so if you put your wires on the wrong side, so you switch your anode and your cathode, the process will not occur spontaneously because there's only one way. However, if you put it backwards and then you supply a source of energy like a battery, you can actually force that process to occur. All right, so now using those hints, all right, I tried to help you, but using those hints, finish this sentence. An electrolytic cell is the opposite of a blank cell. One word, go. All right, did you get an answer? Hopefully you did, but an electrolytic cell is definitely the opposite of a galvanic cell. All right, so a galvanic cell is also an electrochemical cell. That's the main thing we have to understand. Electrochemical cell is the global term, and then you can break that apart into either a galvanic cell, spontaneous, happens on its own and just magically transfers the electrons, okay? Or an electrolytic cell, which is the opposite. This is something that needs a battery. It will not occur on its own, okay? So let's look at a very good example of an electrolytic cell. And usually what we do is we look at a process called electrolysis. So first let's start off with an example. So we have H2O, liquid, and what we want to do is break it apart into H2 gas, so hydrogen gas, and oxygen gas. Okay, so now we know from our experience here on Earth that water does not spontaneously break apart into flammable gases. We know that. We've seen oceans, we've seen lakes. Water is incredibly stable. So in order to force this process to occur, we have to add energy. So what that means is that the splitting of water is a non-spontaneous process. So what we have to do is add 249 kilojoules of energy in order to force water to decompose into hydrogen and oxygen gas, okay? So now, where does this energy come from? Well, let me show you a little breakup here, or a little diagram, I should say. So what we see here is an example of electrolysis. Electrolysis. And so what we're doing is we're taking water and we're breaking it apart into hydrogen and oxygen, okay? So what we can see on this side is our hydrogen, and on the other side we have our oxygen. But the most important thing that I want to point out for you is right here. You have a battery. Anytime you see a battery, you should automatically think, I have an electrolytic cell. You're never going to see a battery connected to a galvanic cell. So what we have here is we see the water just filled up in the center, okay, so that's your water component, and then you hook it up to a battery, providing that 249 kilojoules of energy, and you're able to split the water into hydrogen and oxygen. Now, we all know water has 2 hydrogens to every 1 oxygen. So if you look here, what you can see is the amount of hydrogen gas that's evolved, so this is your hydrogen gas right there, is about twice as much as the amount of oxygen gas that's evolved, which is what you would expect, right? Water is a 2-to-1 ratio of hydrogen and oxygen, so you would definitely expect a 2-to-1 ratio of hydrogen gas and oxygen gas, which is really cool. But here is the issue. Could we possibly use this to make a power plant or something like that? Technically, the answer is no, because where does that original energy source come from? Do we have a giant battery that could just power a power plant? No, that's not the case. And what we end up having to do is using some form of combustion reaction So our old school, our conventional power plants, right, which is heat energy, we do that to somehow get to our battery component, so our electron transfer, which would be our work component. So again, just like with an old power plant, we are still using with this heat energy. So it automatically says that these new power plants are going to be inefficient. If you're ever using heat energy at all, you're going to be inefficient. So if we somehow came up with an electric power plant, okay, so we were able to use electron transfer, so a battery, to actually transfer and create this electrical energy, but starting with some kind of fossil fuel because we have to get this original energy somehow. An electric power plant is only at maximum 63% efficient. Okay, that's it. Now, granted, I don't want to say that's horribly negative because it's much, much, much better than the 33 or 42% efficiency of a standard power plant. So it's much better than that, but you still are using heat energy. You're still doing an inefficient process. You still have to have combustion, which means automatically now you're releasing carbon dioxide in the atmosphere and you have all this other stuff that we're trying to avoid. So it's really not the best system. But there is one way where you can avoid combustion, and this is if you use something called a Electrochemical cell. So let's break that word down, okay, because there's three components here. Photo, hopefully you're learning by now, when you see photo, you're thinking sun or sunlight. Electro, meaning the work component, right, electrical energy. And then your chemical, that's what you start with. So that's our potential energy. So we use our potential energy, convert it to electrical energy, but somehow this has to be started with the sun. We use the energy from the sun to start everything. So let me show you an example of this, okay? And on my right side, what I'm going to do is kind of write out the process for you of how we actually do this. So the first thing that we have to do is we need to dye our anode. So step one, you dye anode with what are called dye molecules. Okay, pretty simple, dye molecules. So now if you see on our diagram, our anode is all the way here on the left side, so it's right down there. Okay, so this whole section with all those different colors, that's your anode. The first thing you have to do is coat that anode with a dye. The second thing you do is that you have your dye molecules that are on the outside. Your dye molecules are going to be exposed to sunlight, and when that happens, they're going to absorb the high energy sunlight. We'll just call it sunlight, okay? And so now we know at this point our high energy sunlight is going to be our UV radiation. All right, so we're not looking for visible, we're not looking for IR, we need high energy. We need enough energy to actually split that water. All right, so now number 3, what happens is that we actually are able to oxidize our water. So water is oxidized, which means it creates oxygen gas and 4 electrons. Okay, so this is all happening at the anode, all right, over here at the anode. So it happens, you oxidize your water using sunlight, releasing these 4 electrons. Now, just like a standard cell, our electrons then are going to leave our anode and go directly to our cathode. So just as before, electrons leave, and they come straight down here to your cathode. So your cathode is on this side now, okay? All right, so number 4, what we have here, electrons leave anode, and they travel to cathode. This we know. This is standard. Nothing new here. But now what we're going to do is add a last step, number 5. And so what we do for number 5 here is that we are actually able to reduce our H+ ions that are sitting there in solution into hydrogen gas. Okay, so that's the whole point. Remember that the whole reason we're doing this is we're trying to create hydrogen gas because it's a beautiful source of fuel. And so we can use something called a photoelectrochemical cell. So we use sunlight to encourage us to do the first oxidation at the anode, then the electrons travel from the anode to the cathode where we can do our reduction, producing our fuel. So if we use this as our original energy source, then we could take the hydrogen gas and put it into a fuel cell or something of that sort and completely try to eliminate the whole heat energy process, which is really cool. Now, another option for this that is terribly, terribly not good yet, but instead of using dye molecules, you can actually use some green plants like algae. And so what happens when we use algae is during the process of photosynthesis, they automatically release hydrogen gas. And so we could avoid this entire electrochemical cell. However, algae only does this with about 10% efficiency, which is terrible, terrible, terrible. And so same thing that about the photoelectrochemical cell is about 10% efficiency as well. So these are just not good processes yet. So now, based on everything I just told you about electrolytic cells, let me leave you with one question, and hopefully you know the answer right now. So today, all right? Today, is it possible to create hydrogen gas from water, okay, liquid water? But when I say possible, I want you to be thinking, is it possible to do this well? Okay, can we do this well? Is it an efficient process? Right now, should we be investing a lot of time and money into trying to split water? Go. All right, did you get an answer? Hopefully you did. And the wording of this question is kind of vague, kind of ambiguous, so really I will take both answers. Is it possible to create hydrogen gas from water? Yes, it's definitely possible. So let's start there. Yes, it's possible. But is it possible to do it well? Is this a viable option? No. Right now, we are not going to be investing a lot of time and money into splitting water to create hydrogen gas, because not only is that one process that is not very well researched and a lot of experiments haven't been done, but we also need to optimize the process of using hydrogen gas as the source of fuel. So we have two big components that we need to put together, and there's just a lot of research still to be done. So is it possible? Yes. Is it a viable option? Unfortunately, no. All right, that's it. Take care of yourself. Drink water.